Hello, my name is Daniel Mckinlay, student number 1901403, and this is the video presentation for Des304 Game Mechanics and System Design. The purpose of this video is to discuss the development of my game Rail Riders, how it was tested, and what setbacks I faced during development. To start, I'll explain what my mechanic was. What was my mechanic? My mechanic was basically a rail grinding, wall running 3D game where the player would have to use the before mentioned mechanics to reach the end of the level in the fastest time possible. The idea of this mechanic didn't really change much over the course of development, however the feel of the game did, mainly due to the testing. How was the game tested? The game was tested by 5 different playtesters. The prototype gathered the players' level completion times and gathered if they had not managed to finish the level. On top of this, the testers were asked to fill out an anonymous survey basically going over their enjoyment of the game and any suggested improvements. The results of these tests influenced the further development of the game quite heavily. I tried my best to implement all the feedback gathered from testers. Over the course of testing, the movement system was tweaked quite heavily. At the start of development, I aimed to make the game feel freer in a way by reducing gravity and making the player's movement speed quite high. Testers did not like this very much at all. Almost all of them described the game as feeling floaty. Basically, the game felt too weightless in their opinion. This was a bit of a surprise to me, as I thought that more freedom of movement would be what players would prefer, but the feedback shows that, in this instance at least, it was quite the opposite. Another common complaint was that the camera was too close to the player, which made it hard for them to see where they were going. Another issue raised was that the game was too easy, which showed in the level completion times. All players completed the level quite fast, and none of them were unable to complete it. I aimed to address these common issues in build number 2. So this is build number 2. Here you can see I've implemented the main menu. As we come into the game here now, you'll probably notice right away that the camera has been adjusted so that the player can see more of the environment. What is less noticeable is that the gravity has also been increased and the objects have been moved further apart. This helped to make the game feel less floaty and made the game harder, which was reflected in the level completion times as they had all went up. All testers agreed that this was a definite improvement over the last build. However, there were still a few things that people wanted improved. A few players suggested making it easier to move left and right, and a few also said that they wanted to reach the maximum speed faster. Another 2 suggested a game over screen and the ability to press a button and restart a level. All this feedback was implemented in my final build. This is the final build. For this build, I implemented a game over screen so that players had a choice on what to do when they reached the end of the level. I also implemented a second level, which is what you're seeing now. I used all the things I'd learned from creating the first level and all the feedback from it to create this level, with the idea of it being harder as the player should have learned the basics from level 1. Also, what may be hardest to see is that I made it easier for the player to move left and right to address the feedback I got from the previous build. Again, survey results agreed that this build was a definite improvement over the last build. All but one said that they liked the second level more, and that was because level 2 offered more variance in gameplay and was harder, which was the goal when making it. The level times for level 1 were consistent, and the level times for level 2 were longer than level 1, despite them both being around the same length, which again was the hope when designing the level. This concluded the development of my prototype, which is something I'll now talk about more. The development of Rail Riders. What went right and what went wrong? Overall, I feel like the development of this game went decently well. I'm happy with the final build and the testers' response to it, and being able to implement mechanics and features that I was unfamiliar with. My Unity knowledge was admittedly quite lacking before this module, so I'm pleased that I could develop my skills in this area. However, there are a few things that went wrong. For starters, the blog. I feel that I should have updated the blog more frequently and been more in depth with it. The reason I wasn't is because of the second thing that went wrong with development. My second and biggest issue was that I gravely underestimated how long each of my mechanics would take to implement. The wall riding took me 2 weeks to implement when I planned for it to only take 1, and the rail riding took me over a month and a half when I planned for it to only take 2 weeks at most. It was because of these that I did not update the blog as much as I should have, since there wasn't much for me to say in the blogs, which led to the blogs being 2 to 3 weeks apart and quite short. The rail riding is something I really want to focus on. In the end, I couldn't implement it the way I wished to. My initial idea of having the player snap onto the rail was discarded as I just could not figure out how to do it. At first, I tried to follow tutorials for trains in Unity and make the player follow the rail like a train would follow a track. This never worked how I wanted it to. Even when the player would follow the rail, it was incredibly glitchy, usually resulting in loss of control and the player spinning off into some random direction. In the end, I had to basically duct tape it, so to speak, so that there were invisible walls on each side of the rail, so that the player could not just slip off them. This topic leads quite nicely into the last topic of this presentation. Future improvements. If I were to continue working on this prototype, I would absolutely start with making the rail riding what I envisioned it to be, instead of basically just a little cylinder that the player just flies through with no control. Also, while the feedback was very positive, the changes to the movement system did make it feel a tiny bit floatier once again. This is something I would spend time fine-tuning and testing repeatedly. All in all, however, I am pleased with the current state of the prototype. I feel like I learned quite a bit about not just how Unity works, but also about how player expectations can be different from what you envision. Thank you for watching and playing Rail Riders. I hope you have a pleasant day. Goodbye.